Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion is an indie darling of 2021 that captured the hearts of critics and players. It's a little adventure of a lone rutabaga dealing with puzzles, humor, and government bureaucracy in a simple little style of an equally simple little protagonist. So what do I have to say about it? Well, it's alright. Okay, I can do a better job than that. Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion is about as ludicrous as its namesake would imply. It's a witty and pleasant experience that doesn't overstay its welcome, although it's also running around $15, which is a little excessive of a price. But if the idea of following around the exploits of a root vegetable on his journey of twists and turns in dodging financial obligation of his citizenship as a living existential nightmare, then you should get it. Preferably on a sale. Let's start with the elephant in the room. This game can take up to 2 hours to complete. Like, complete everything. Now, I know for some folks,
2 hours? Ooh.
That's a bit of a problem, but sometimes it's just nice to have a quaint little experience, something you can enjoy front to back without needing a major sum of hours to be thoroughly invested into. Just maybe not at $15. I'm pretty dead set on saying the experience is something that has to be done with as little context as possible because the game is very comedically focused, and in that department it is also pretty darn charming. Even if the game goes on for only so long, comedy gets a hell of a lot harder when you have to continue it long past the point it was funny, but it never really reaches that point. Although there is one feature that perfectly represents that horrible, horrible possibility, but we're not there yet. At first, I didn't really give the music much thought since the opening tune for Vegieville became the poster child of the music for me, but then after listening to the tracks on my own, I realized how good the music is. Like, it's really good. Every area has its distinct music, and within it, its own tone, tempo, and style. The amount of material that the creators managed to get out of the music is truly staggering. The only complaint I have is the music itself can be very brief, only really running around a minute or less with some exceptions, but it's a fast-paced game where the areas you visit won't last that long, and to an extent, the loops are pretty seamless. It might get grating, but the options are there to turn that sucker down, along with some funny little features like changing the intensity of the shaking effect, which is kind of fun, or the more questionable option, like the difficulty choices to make the game easier? It's a subject to dive into later, but for now I'm content to say this game is not going to be that difficult to play, so use this at your own expense. Sometimes you'll get an item and return it to the character who needs it, or you'll talk to one character who gives you an item, and you'll then need to go talk to a different character. But the process of getting from point A to B is the big part of the game, and it consists of fighting and completing puzzles. Although fighting is a word I would use in quotation marks, because the mechanics of it are more based around enemies being obstacles along your path from point A to B, but there are also bosses, and the bosses have puzzles in their respective arenas, implying that you're able to defeat them using the techniques provided to you, but nothing really stops you from just going up to them and decking them with your sword. It seems the developers noticed this over time, so bosses at a certain point are designed with the incentive to use methods other than just hitting them, but by the time you reach that point, you will have already beaten every other boss to death with your bare hands. And this is a kind of bigger picture issue that belabor the experience in a way that one could call frustrating, because without the game introducing new concepts to you to keep things fresh while wedged between the game's comedic stylings and ridiculous lore, you're left with moments like the Tots and Pops letter arc. You know, where you need to go through a haunted forest with a puzzle that has a specific path you need to take or restart so you can get to the next item you need to progress. But once you've done that, you can also talk to Tots, who will then give you a letter that you need to take back down to Pops, who will then give you a letter which you then need to take back up to Tots, so you'll need to follow through the specific path again to get back up to Tots, and all the game's interactions boil down to doing basically the same thing, although this is technically the only kind of quest like this, because it's also probably a joke. But here's the thing, without navigation at its core, you remove the puzzles and you're left with the interactions, but without the interactions, you remove the comedy, leaving you in a desolate wasteland of a combat system that isn't a combat system because its design philosophy was based around a completely different set of principles which are gone now. Which brings us to the train. After its debut release, Turnip Boy got an update for Sunset Station, a little package of additional content that I think in hindsight of Turnip Boy's most recent adventure was a test run of ideas for that given sequel. Because, dear lord, alright, context. So after beating the game, which apparently features multiple endings, a bold statement when it's just a single requirement to fully complete the game, as it's actively encouraging you to do so. But if you need to know for that epic game theory level lore through of Turnip Boy commits tax evasion, just rip up every piece of paper you come across. Anyway, so after you beat the game in any state at any percentage, you get access to the Limitless Line train, which is not a dungeon so much as a trial, a test of endurance, for how long it will be before you realize that you're trying to 100% something that you just can never complete. That title, Limitless Line, isn't just a joke. It's probably for real, and if it isn't, my patience to find out is sadly not as limitless. This is an endless roguelike, where you get upgrades, fight through levels of enemies and bosses, with the further you get, netting you more tickets, which you can use to unlock more hats and sometimes more upgrades, which you can take when you go through the gauntlet of the Limitless Line over and over again until the inevitable nuclear Armageddon that ends tax season forever. The system is very superficial because without the incentive of progression, it turns out it's kind of frustrating to operate with a game mechanic that is too simple to provide respite or satisfaction long enough to make this worth playing for longer than, I don't know, infinite amounts of time. What's worse is although the Limitless Line can last, theoretically, an unlimited amount of time, the rewards do not, and neither does the comedy, as every joke you come across along your travel becomes a joke that you've heard 1,000,000 times before, like the chicken crossing the road, but this time you're the immortal poultry, locked in the perpetual purgatory of trying to get across a never-ending highway where rush hour gets faster the further you go. And you know what? I don't want to get back on that road anymore, or track, or train, I don't know. I don't want to find out, because if I have to deal with another goddamn JoJo reference, I might commit, insert JoJo reference here. In conclusion, Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion is a fun experience that's worth having at least once. I'll remember it for the fun moments and clever jokes that make it truly worth playing, and hopefully not the time I spent partaking in a gameplay loop that was about as dead as it was making my synapses from experiencing it as a Sisyphean task. Like having a consistent upload schedule.
We won't pay our taxes, we've got rent and we've got bills. There's layers to the onion and his bureaucratic thrills. All you flora, all you fauna, let us venture through the land. Take down Mayor Onion and all his thieving plans. We won't pay our taxes, we've got rent.